Welcome back to the Culture Creators podcast. Today, my guest is Curtin Duperouzel. Curtin, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Bree. Thanks, I appreciate it.
So we are sitting here in Curtin University at the School of Business and Law.
Yeah.
Can you, for the listener, just place yourself in terms of, who are you, what you get up to, and what is it that's brought you to be sitting here talking about culture with me today?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been a full-time lecturer here since 2010. I was a tutor here beforehand, and I pretty much got involved with running the sports management degree, and that was phased out anyway. So I stayed on doing a large core unit, business law, which is now markets and legal frameworks, and yeah, I've been involved in that since 2012. Yeah, so my role involves both teaching and research, and on the research side, I did my doctorate, completed it in 2016, and I've written a lot in that sort of area, leadership, consciousness, spirituality. Also done a bit of work around human responsibilities as sort of like a counterweight to the focus on human rights, having that balance. And yeah, sort of how do we transform law firms in terms of the way that they operate. Can be a really cutthroat kind of business that has given rise to a lot of dysfunction within the profession, mental health issues, suicide, those sorts of things. So yeah, really making that better, evolving the profession forward. And I've also been involved a lot with conscious capitalism as well, which is, talks a lot about, profits are important, no doubt, they're the lifeblood of every business. But purpose is equally important. What's the central animating reason for why a business exists, right? And who does it serve? What are the broader stakeholders? So hugely important in law and of course in other organisations as well. So yeah, that's really what my focus is, and my doctorate really looked at what's the role of a lived calling, or vocation is another word for saying that. In driving the accomplishment of a virtuous purpose by leaders. Yeah, really looking at that and digging into that. So yeah, that was a great, very, very formative project for me in terms of my learning about those sort of things. Deepened my spirituality a lot. So yeah, that's a short sort of summation of my journey in more recent times.
So what were some of the key themes that you found from your PhD?
Well, really, I think a key aspect was really looking at getting back to the spiritual heart of who we are as human beings and how our calling or vocation emanates from that. And really how by naturally living that, having that alignment, that integrity, which I define as, or that the data really spoke to, was a person's ability to facilitate an internal and external state of wholeness in the world, right? How, by them naturally living that, they're going to demonstrate leadership behavior. So for example, if you're going to be a leader, you've got to be enthusiastic, right? Naturally, you've got to be engaging. So engagement flows from enthusiasm. And if you look at the original etymology of the word enthusiasm, it is pretty much to be infused by the force of God or spirit. That's actually the etymology, right? So there's that connection there. Similarly, the essence of a calling is purpose, right? If you do not have a purpose, you are going to be adrift. Thus, you're naturally going to follow something outside of that purpose, or someone else's purpose, someone else's ideology, someone else's objectives, right?
Captured by someone else.
Yep, captured, right? So you're not capable of leading yourself, right? So you're going to be following someone else, right? So that purpose, which is core to a calling, is something that's foundational in being able to lead yourself and others. And of course, you can't lead others unless you lead yourself.
Yes.
Right. So that there's that connection. Service is another one, right? So this, when I'm talking about having a strong spirituality, informing your purpose, your calling, your vocation, that's not mindless, trite navel gazing, right?
Yeah.
That inevitably leads out into the world. When you think about vocation and calling, a big part of that is service to the world, right? It's the manifestation of that purpose, bringing it to life, not only for your own benefit, your own intrinsic fulfillment, all those good things that come, but also for the world. And normally it's the case that it's just that unbridled service that you give, because you just can't help that want to live that calling.
Yes.
And all the good stuff that flows from that just comes organically from that service orientation. You know, so it's sort of a matter of people going out there, looking at what they can get from the world. It's principally, how can I give to the world of this giftedness, these intrinsic talents that I have, or what have you, this natural passion I have for what I'm doing. And then from that comes all of this good internal stuff, you know, fulfillment, contentment, all that sort of stuff. But it's not looking for it. It's just naturally, it organically arising as a result of living in alignment with your vocational purpose.
So I'm getting a real sense, if we bring those 3 points together, that by being very much connected to your own nature,
yes,
and then being able to look out into the world, you know, with a purpose, and that's coming from that place of your core, your nature.
Absolutely. And
then you're able to give and be of service to the world rather than take.
That integral alignment. Like, I mean, if you don't have that alignment, because you can't give what you don't have, right? So through that alignment is really how you tap into your intrinsic gifts, your passion, your drive to help others.
You can't give what you don't have.
You can't give what you don't have. So it's really all got to be something that you find within yourself first, you uncover. Yep. So it's already in there. It's not something you have to get from the outside. It's something that you already have. And then, of course, the support of virtues that come from that. Like I'm really big, I wouldn't say I have a problem with it, but I think it does have its limitations. You know, when I hear about people talking about resilience building and these sorts of things, it's like, well, hang on. Resilience is a virtue that is innate within each of us. It's just that we kind of divorce ourselves from it because we identify with a whole raft of different things that we aren't really, right? That we aren't essentially who we are, right? So it's really just getting back in touch with all those, the essence of who we are, right? And leading from that place. And then we can draw forth these virtues, these talents that we've been given that no one else really has, and that we have the unique ability to give effect to in the context of our lives, right? The particularity of our existence, that even though others may have similar giftings and those sorts of things, well, you know, that's been given effect in other places. And so it's hugely important, you know, being on this journey, right? So,
from your research, how do these more centered leaders look at the culture, the setting of what they're responsible for?
Yeah, I mean, you just touched on something key. You know, it's about taking responsibility. You know, it's that saying that I love as well. A fish rots from the head down, right? So while everyone contributes to a culture, right, because they're bringing who they are to a particular space, and that's naturally going to influence that space. It's obviously the leaders that have a massive role in that, because they're the ones who have the formal power or authority, right, to shape that culture in the most powerful way. So the tone they set is hugely important. And going back to that whole notion of responsibility. So a key aspect of leadership, as I said, you can only exercise responsibility in presence. Because if you don't have presence, what you're bringing is reactiveness to that space, not responsibility. Because you know, with that responsiveness, you have to be present, occupy that space. What's happening? How are people being? How's that impacting their behavior? What's happening on the outside that's impacting what's happening on the inside? Seeing it, analyzing it, and responding to it. Whereas if people are more ego-centered, harried, focused on busyness, these sorts of things, they're not centered, it all becomes reactive. And typically the outcomes that come when people are reactive, leaders or otherwise, the culture in which they create, what's created is not optimal. Right?
Yes.
So and none of this is to say, if people are living their calling, they're leading from that space, everything's going to be hunky-dory. The world is as it is.
Yeah.
We are as we are. We're imperfect. I believe we're perfect in our imperfection, right?
Yes.
But the best chance of having an optimal outcome is really maintaining this presence, living from this space, living from this integrity, right? And working together to optimize outcomes and growing things into their fullness, people, entities, from that space, really.
It's interesting. What I'm picking up from you is the more centered a leader becomes, the more they own the space, as you called it.
Yeah.
And the space is not a physical space necessarily.
But it is given effect through, it's manifested through action, right? So in terms of like culture, how I see it, primarily it's the way of individuals being in a space, in an entity, whether it's whatever type of organisation it is.
Yes.
And then naturally how that's going to manifest in behaviour, right? So how, for example, if I know I try not to work in binaries, but it's hard not to sometimes. Like, for example, if you've got a leader that's very egocentric, right, they may play in their space zero-sum games, right?
Yes.
So if you've got really, really talented people coming up, they may try to suppress them or quash them because in their mind, that person rising is going to be a threat to their position, right? So they sort of can't accept that the benefit of that other person will be a win for them, that it'll be perceived as a loss. Thus, they'll take sabotaging type of behavior towards that individual.
Yes.
Whereas if the leader's more integrated, right, they can hold that space for the thriving of this individual is also thriving for me as someone who's able to bring them through, build them up, build their, enhance their competencies.
Yeah.
And because I'm not egocentrically attached to my position, when the time comes, 3-5 years down the line, I can step away, knowing that I've done what is best for this organisation beyond me, as an
so that's
ego-based
that bigger
entity.
than me perspective, which you get from considering, religion, spirituality, which gives you that greater sense of beyond me.
Yep. And then the focus is, of course, what's best for the common good of this entity, right? Which of course is beyond them, beyond you, and then bringing that individual up to take your place, right, in a way that is as good or better than how you left it, right?
Yes.
And to me, that's a really great definition of success. It's not a story of loss or losing anything. It's like everything in the world's transitory, and we shouldn't be too attached to the titles we have and the status and these sorts of things. All that stuff comes and goes, right?
There's a nice connection to time in that as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
In that you can link the point in time today to a point in the future, not necessarily, harried by the past. You can see that movement quite clearly, which your more sort of ego-driven leader would be very much now. And this is a present and clear threat to me now.
Yeah, that's
Never
right.
mind the future.
Yeah.
Or maybe the connection to the future there is they can see threat and them losing. So
Yeah, so I think the key thing is they can just see things in a broader light. So I think it enhances their perspicacity to be able to see things kind of beyond themselves. Because of course, ego is kind of very small and confined. So it tends to kind of lock us into ourselves where we're not really thinking about other people. Like for example, it could be like if you're dealing with staff or people you're working with, not being open to their ideas because you want to do things your way, right? So, when I talk about that closeness of ego consciousness, a big part of that is, not really allowing them to own the journey, to provide their feedback, as important as that is to making things, better, right? So, and to contribute to like a healthy, functioning, flourishing organisation. So,
Yeah, I guess I'm still. Yeah, I can see those mechanics, and I'm still interested in this space,
Yeah.
which is still very, like I said, not physical, and there's almost this putting in positivity into this unseen space, rather than just littering it, almost.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting. I kind of had a hunch about things going in, but with the motive study that I did my doctorate on, I couldn't impose my prior understandings on the findings. But what naturally emerged from just the questioning that I gave was really the chief barrier to being able to live a calling and to manifest leadership behavior was really this ego interference I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Right. So, really, the more that individuals function from their ego or this false sense of who they are, self-importance, these sorts of things, that's really what brought the toxicity, like you said, littered the spaces that they occupied to create that dysfunction. And I think
Right.
you can really see this across different domains. Like for example, if you look at, say, the Me Too movement, you look at like Harvey Weinstein. Well, obviously, the way he was operating in terms of personal gratification, discarding, the women and all those sorts of abuses, highly egocentric behaviour. If you look at the sporting domain, you look at, say, Cricket Australia and the sandpaper
Yep.
incident, right? Then a lot of the findings to come out of that investigation was you had a huge amount of ego contaminating the operations of the players and also administrators. So there was this pressure to win at all costs. So it wasn't about how you played the game. And I found it very interesting. When there was a lot of reporting on those incidents, what did they say was violated? The spirit of the game. The spirit of the game, right? So the spirit, in essence, being what should inhabit a functional and optimal type of character to a space, to a reciprocal game where everyone involved in it can benefit, right? Yes, it can be competitive, but that doesn't have to be you win and I lose, even though practically that's how things play out in like sport.
Yeah.
But from a more spiritual standpoint, you can look more to, say, the Olympic ethos, where it's just you push me, I push you, we're competitors, and we get the best outcome. We get the best out of each other, and the chips fall where it may.
Yes.
Right? So it's an interesting type of paradigm shift, with that. But yeah, I mean that cricket sort of example, where ego was a really big contaminating force, and you can see that with a lot of different sporting teams. I mean, typically you've got teams that have like a dynasty where they have like a period of sustained success. Normally, what brings it down is ego, right?
Yeah.
It's normally the chief players in that game. You could think of, I could think of basketball with like Shaquille O'Neal, Kobe Bryant with the Lakers. You can think of, say, the New England Patriots with Bill Belichick and Tom Brady. It becomes about, okay, who's getting more shine? Who's getting more credit?
Yes.
And then things sort of break apart because it becomes more about that than about keeping the integrity of what got us to that place of excellence, that sustained excellence in the first place. So normally it's ego that leads things to become undone. And it's a recurrent pattern across domains because that's essential to human. It's kind of like that myth of Icarus and Daedalus, flying too close to the sun and not having that humility to realize that's not a good thing to be doing, even though your father has warned you not to do it.
Yes.
And then what happens after that? You crash and burn. That's not a surprise. It's the same story. It's how the Empire of Rome came to an end. Things got hedonistic and what made it great in the first place, it wasn't about that anymore. It was about people just gratifying their own desires, the lust for power, these sorts of things, and how that manifests in different ways. It's a very similar story in how that all works out.
It's interesting actually because one of the two lines of investigation behind this podcast is how can we begin to increase our capability and capacity to influence the cultures around us. And what I'm hearing from you, paraphrasing, is the closer we are to the grounded, present center of our life, as opposed to being away from that and into ego. The closer we are, the more we can look beyond ourselves and feel the sensitivity of the spaces around us, which is where culture exists. So there's almost like, what I'm getting from you is almost like there's this inverse relationship. The further we are from the center of our life, further we are from our present, the less sensitivity we're going to have.
Absolutely.
To the culture and the space and the unseen.
Yeah, but we can't help but impact it regardless, because whatever state of being we're at, our level of consciousness, you could say, is going to impact it regardless. But I think the whole we're active agents all the time. I'm talking to you right now, and I'm not necessarily, well, I am now, but I'm not necessarily thinking about my feet, but I still have feet, even though I don't feel them right this minute. Absolutely.
So you're right. There's whether we are sensitive to it or not, we're always in, and we're always active participants transmitting out into the culture.
Yeah, totally. And when I was talking about, from my study, I was talking about the virtues of the human spirit that are manifested by individuals living their calling and leading from that space. A couple of them there are openness, right, and presence, right. So in terms of, and also the virtue that I talk about is goodness as well. So when you look at like the synergy of those three things, if people have that alignment, openness, goodness, and also presence.
Yes.
Right. So the combination of those three, if you look at their demonstration, it's going to be, okay, I'm here, I can see what's going on. No one person can see things perfectly, but you've got a much more broader perspective of what you can see. You're sounding people out. What are their experience of what's going on? And whatever the dysfunction that exists in that, because you're taking a lot more in, you can take more effective steps to heal or reconcile what those problems are. So so that's that sort of connectedness as well.
Yeah. So that brings up something interesting. That the more you're present, the more you can handle the complexity of what's in front of you. And complexity is, for me, appreciating the connections that are at play. I find that the more we get pulled towards our ego or captured by an emotional state that takes us away from being present, the more we want to just zero things down to the one thing that's the cause of all of this.
Absolutely. And
which there seldom is.
Yeah. And so I think, going back to, you're exactly right. So, it's life's multifactorial. The environments we inhabit, there's a whole bunch of different things going on. But, going back to this notion of integrity, a person's internal ability to facilitate wholeness within themselves and then perceive that in their environment, right? That creates the vessel to be able to appreciate that complexity, because you're seeing things from a much broader perspective than just what my ego allows me to see, so I feel competent to be able to act in that environment. And another virtue of the human spirit is actualizing capacity. So, like Maslow used to talk about, the self-actualization at the top of his hierarchy of needs. So when I talked to leaders and I went in and I talked about, what are some of your habits? What are things you do? Continuous growth and continuous learning was a big, facilitating continuous improvement in their organization was a big part of what they did. Now, you can't do that. A person can't do that if they're centered within themselves in their ego, because only what is within their ability to control will be tolerable to who they are. Because then once you start going beyond your comfort zone, that's perceived as a threat to your ego needs or ego identity, right? So you're kind of holding on too close to the past, the way you see the world. So you really have to, I think, to evolve yourself, to evolve the space in which you occupy as a leader or as someone else who just works within it, you've got to have that openness, that willingness to expand your horizons, right? To be able to come in and learn and apply those new learnings to that situation to make it better than it occupied before. You know, because the ego sees that as a threat. It doesn't want it. It doesn't want that. It just wants to be able to come in there and impose whatever understandings it has on whatever's going on into that space. And that, it's kind of stultifying to life, because there's no growth in that.
Yeah.
You know, it's just maintaining the status quo.
Yeah.
This is as I want it to be, right? It may not be life-giving to the other people in that space, but that's what I want it to be. That's what I can handle. But where's the potential in that? Where's the thriving in that? Because really, you're just maintaining a sense of survival or whatever state it currently occupies. So there's also that at work as well. And yeah, that actualization impulse is another virtue of the human spirit as well. So the more so the more that individuals have that spiritual alignment, the more they'll have that openness and that ability to bring their being to help a place, sort of an organisation or that unseen space, grow and thrive into something more than it currently is.
And when we're talking,
I hope I'm not talking too much in abstract kind of
No.
terms, but really, this. I sort of see this stuff as infinitely practical, because whatever state of consciousness or being that we occupy, it's always manifested through behaviour, and that stuff is just tangible. It's right there.
It's right there.
It's right there. You can't escape it.
And you can see it.
Yes.
Yeah. And you might say that you're doing one thing,
Yeah.
but you'll be behaving in a way that is aligned to that consciousness.
Yeah. And that demonstrates quite tangibly a lack of integrity in that individual. So we're talking about
And
stuff
integrity here, we mean wholeness.
Yes. If a person isn't whole, right? So, and this is the interesting thing. You look at individuals that aren't whole. So okay, what's the opposite of wholeness? It's brokenness. It's you're going to manifest fractures. If you look at highly
fragmented.
Exactly right. So if you look at highly egocentric leaders, what do? They cause division. They cause conflict, disharmony, fracturing behavior. So tangibly, this is how ego consciousness manifests itself. Yep. It's Donald Trump. And I say that I'm looking at the individual, not politically.
Yes.
I try to look at that apolitically. But if you look at someone like that who I think objectively is quite egocentric.
Well, you in group and out group, don't you?
Yeah, well, yeah, in that sort of sense.
I'm in this group, and then there's them.
Totally. And also, if you look at a physical manifestation, even though obviously Mexico's a neighbor of the US, well, what did he want to do? He wanted to, build that wall, build that separation, right? So instead of bringing people together, right? Or you can look at like the insurrection of January 6th, right? Instigating. Okay, I think it's undeniable. He had a big role in instigating that that tumultuous kind of event that many perceive to be like a threat to the democracy in the United States. There was that threat, or for example, the denial of the election result. So I mean, Trump's and I guess he's an easy target, but I think he demonstrates quite well how ego consciousness works. And there's other leaders closer to home, whether it's sport, entertainment, those sorts of things. So yeah, you do see those sort of patterns repeat themselves across contexts, and it really is something that we should pay attention to, because it speaks quite loudly of what the outcomes are. But I think if we're not present to it, if we're not aware of it, these are the patterns that kind of tend to repeat themselves. It's kind of like the universal story, but in terms of a negative outcome that's affected.
Yet we tend to celebrate these ego-driven leaders. I mean, you just gave the example of Trump. He held the most powerful seat on the planet. Yeah.
And look, another part, obviously...
And he was voted in.
Yeah. And there were, I think there were certain needs or things that the constituency that voted for him was looking for. And obviously he knew how to tap into those things. Now this leads into something interesting as well in terms of leadership. The difference between charisma and charm and cunning, right? Or you can just say, bring them together and call it chunning, right? Charm and cunning, right? So if you look at the definition of what charisma is, the etymology of it, it's basically the emanation of being in this spiritual alignment. That's what charisma is, by definition, right? So you will notice that individuals who are living their calling and leading from that space, they are very charismatic. Now that charisma may be demonstrated in a quite... Charisma doesn't always have to be out there wowing the crowd like a magician, right? It can be done quietly, but you know that individual's on purpose. There's something about them. They've got a grounding. They've got an authority to what they do, right? That's charisma. Charm and cunning, which is not charisma, that is often what is demonstrated by more egocentric leaders. But my perspective on this is that people mistake that and label it as charisma, right? Because they don't have the spiritual connectedness within themselves as perceivers to be able to tell the difference between what is genuine charisma and what is charm and cunning.
Ooh, repeat that for me again.
Okay. So people looking at a leader
Yes.
and labeling them as charismatic, I think where that comes from is within themselves. They don't have that spiritual connectedness to discern what charisma really is. So they confuse that.
When you say spiritual connected to the human spirit,
Within themselves.
yes,
To be able to perceive, and discern the charm and cunning that they're demonstrating from what charisma really is.
right.
Yeah. So that's a
Because
core
when you
distinction that I make.
So this would line up with the deeper you can look into yourself, and the deeper you are connected within yourself, the deeper you can look and connect into the outside world.
Absolutely, totally.
It's almost like a loop.
Yep.
And so what you're saying is that we ourselves have become disconnected from our human spirit, so we've lost our capacity to become discerning between the difference between charm and cunning and charismatic.
Correct.
And in confusing the two,
Yes.
we just get attracted to something.
You're exactly right. And that's the problem, right? And then, of course, because if I'm egocentric in my consciousness, I'm going to be attracted to other people that demonstrate that sort of the behavior that emanates from that same consciousness that I have. I'm going to be resonant with it because that is going to affirm and reflect back the world I want to see based on my state of being. Likewise, if you're a more spiritually inclined human being, you're aligned. Now, each of us this is the thing, right? And this is why presence is so important, because from moment to moment, we can flit between being more spiritually aligned or being more egocentric. So if we're having, like if you and I were to just have an argument, right? And you were to say something that might prick my ego.
Yeah.
I could get defensive and I could say something insulting, right? That's the defensiveness of the, because I feel like I've got something to defend about myself. So I'm not listening.
I found something unwittingly and
but I'm not listening to feedback that I presume has been given in good faith, right? To try to resolve some sort of tension or to come to some form of understanding, integrity between us, right? So I'm forfeiting that because I've allowed my ego to sort of to hijack the situation. So I've kind of let the possibility for integrity, for wholeness, understanding in the context of this present moment situation of sabotage that by allowing myself to become triggered, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is this whole, what I'm talking about in terms of spiritual alignment, or being led, and this is the thing as well. Just one sort of thread tends to pull on another, right? So when you have, and this is the core thing, when you are spiritually aligned and you have that integrity, you have spiritual authority.
Right.
Going back to the etymology of authority, the ability to author a way forward, to write, to have autonomy, to lead, right? When you don't have that integrity, the ego's always in control.
Yes.
The ego's leading you.
Yes.
That's why you get defensive.
You're on the back of the bus.
You get responsive. You're on the back of the bus. You're hijacked. You're on for the ride. You're not consciously directing
Yes.
where you want to go, and then you've got no hope in hell
Yes.
of leading people who you're with to a better destination that is more so brought about by being spiritually aligned with your purpose and these sorts of things. Okay, so in the moment, you can, you've got these things at work. So, it's really important. And just tying that back to where we were before. Yes, so it's hugely important to be able to affect a purpose that you have that presence, right? And you're not allowing yourself to be hijacked by the ego and taken in a direction that you really don't want it to go. So,
So it's interesting because if I now look at this, so if I view culture as, say for instance, I've got, I don't know, arbitrarily 1,000 people, and the majority of them are not connected to human spirit.
Yep.
Yet, like my feet, they're transmitting into the culture in the space that connects them.
Correct.
They can be quite easily swayed and blown around.
Absolutely.
And if somebody displays a degree of cunning and charm,
Machiavellianism,
then
narcissism,
that will sweep through.
Yeah.
And because of the lack of widespread connection, that will gain a sense of momentum.
Totally.
Because all these little transmitters are transmitting something into the culture, the space that's in between us, this unseen space. And so then you can start to see how groups get waves of things come through them.
And you get politics, things like that, politicking in organisations. And importantly, and this is a huge problem at the moment, and this, if you look at like the Great Resignation, what's going on in our workforce, things like that, and the problem of disengagement, right?
Yes.
If you don't have people who are there working, living in alignment with their calling or vocation, right? They may see their work as just a job or a career, which for me, I see jobs and careers as very different things from a calling or vocation.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
So then if they're not living their calling and something weaker is guiding them, that's when you're more likely to have that divergence away from what the core animating purpose of the organisation stands for or what it should be. That's problematic.
Because people will just are disconnected and will just do all things necessary to do the job to get the pay.
Yep, you're correct.
And we become transactional and disconnected.
Correct. So you're either doing it for a pay, that's a job to meet your immediate needs, or from a career standpoint, even though a career standpoint puts you closer in terms of your orientation to what your calling or vocation may be, it's still often transactional. It's more long term, but it's still based on meeting those ego needs. What leveling up of status am I aiming for in the long term? How am I looking to build my potential to earn greater pay? These sorts of things, right? So that's a career, right? It's still distinct from a calling, because still, like with a career, a lot of a big animating purpose of that is what can I gain from my long-term involvement. Whereas with a calling, being present, being service orientated, it's more about what can I give, and whatever comes to you happens organically, naturally.
Yes.
Internal and external rewards. Now, so and I would say, look, we don't live in a world that often rewards this, but in terms of intrinsic and extrinsic benefits, if you look at it, if a person's living their calling, they love what they do, they're engaged, they're passionate, they go the extra mile in providing service.
They fully turn up, they're flat at it.
That's it. They're here. They're going above and beyond what their role demands. What's going to happen to those individuals? They tend to be the ones in a healthier type of organisation that move up the ladder.
Yes.
Because they're the ones that it's like you can't hold them down. So the extrinsic benefits that flow to them over time tend to be, even when you're talking about things like position, pay, those sorts of things, tend to be greater, right, than those who are just in it for a job or a career.
Yes.
So it has to be looked at from that standpoint as well. Plus, they get the benefit of all the intrinsic benefits that comes in terms of contentment with what they're doing, from that harmonious alignment with their spirit and calling. Fulfillment, which is different from satisfaction. I think satisfaction is quite lukewarm. If you look at what Mick and Keith were talking about, I can't get no satisfaction,
yes.
right? I think they were talking about more carnal pleasures and those sorts of things. They weren't talking about deeper spiritual level of fulfillment. So fulfillment is a much deeper level of, I think it's a function of having that integrity, whereas satisfaction is more the meeting of temporary pleasures in the moment. There's a distinction there. Yep. So
there's a question that's bubbling up now, and it's going to flip things slightly on its head. We're talking about this deeper connection within us to the human spirit. Spirituality. And so at the moment, the discussion so far is I'm almost picturing we're all nodes, we all are connected to human spirit, but are we? That's a good question. We're all alive, but are we connecting to human spirit, or are we not?
I think the life force and the human spirit are one of the same thing. I mean, people might define it in different ways, right?
So I guess my question, it might be an interesting thought experiment, is we're looking at it from the journey of the nodes. If we flip it to the journey of the life force, when we have large swathes of people who are unconnected, what would be the trajectory of the human spirit in obviously trying to connect? Or do you see where I'm going?
I think it gets suppressed. It never dies, but it can get suppressed. And so I think to the extent that you've got swathes of people, like you said, who are living unconsciously, you're just getting the dysfunctionality of ego getting perpetuated. And that's kind of contaminating spiritually where the world, our organizations, individually, where we can go in the fulfillment of our individual and collective purposes. I think that's really what you see.
I suppose over time, the human spirit will try to connect. I think I think a lot of people can resonate with the idea that you may well be working in a role, but then all of a sudden you have 2 weeks holiday. I don't know, you might go to Rottnest for 2 weeks, and then after the first week of drinking quite a bit and having a good time, there'll be quiet moments where the human spirit's poking through, and it's like, I never really actually wanted to do this.
Absolutely.
What I really wanted to do was paint or own a coffee shop, but then Monday comes around.
And this is why COVID proved so revelatory in some respects, because you had an imposed space being created where people had this room to rethink, what they do, just realizing, okay, maybe I'm just on the hamster wheel of consumption and these sorts of things, and being a cog in the wheel. I'm not really leading my life. I'm being led by these ego needs and these sorts of things in my work. I want something more, because whatever yearning that I've suppressed through busyness, sensory gratification, these sorts of things, and addiction, those sorts of things, then that space has opened up. I want more. I need to go in a different direction. I need to do more integral work on myself to take myself in a different direction. And this is, the Great Resignation is all about that, whether it's people who've been laid off or people who are just more voluntarily thinking, what I'm doing is more of a job or a career. I don't want something that's, like you said, transactional. I want something that's transformational.
My life is more
for myself and for what I bring to the world through my service for it. So I think, COVID obviously, there's a lot of devastation that it wreaked, but in terms of the some of the blessings that have come from it. You know, I think that's kind of one of them.
It's that, it's that forced space. I think I've heard it with people around me with this concept of going back to normal, and people's response of, well, I look at it now and I don't normal wasn't that good.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, which it shook things up, and yeah, that's right. So yeah, and just kind of giving us the ability, the room to kind of look at where things are going, and to see how things can be changed in a positive direction. You know, not just perpetuating the status quo of how things were before. And I think that's, you know, whether it's imposed or voluntary, that having that space to be able to contemplate where we're at, how we're contributing to the world, and those sorts of things, it's really, really valuable. But often people don't wake up and just do that. Normally, it comes to adversity of some form, you know, and this is a big thing as well. You know, that came out in my data, that these transformations, a big catalyst for that was different forms of adversity, whether it was an onset of a disease, a loss of a loved one, other traumatic events, you know, going broke, these sorts of things. These are kind of like the fork in the road moments where you realise, you know, the direction I was going, it wasn't life-giving. It wasn't enhancing my life. But this sort of thing, and it's like that J.K. Rowling quote, pretty much saying that adversity or turmoil became the foundation on which she rebuilt her life. And if you look at her story, you know, broke, these sorts of things, and then, you know, gets inspiration to write Harry Potter, and, you know, you look at where that's gone.
Power,
you know, amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And you got to ask, well, you know, in terms of like the seeds of all that stuff that she created, where did it come from? Well, it came from within herself.
Yes.
That creative capacity, that if you look at the intrinsic nature of the life force, whether some conceive of it as God or whatever, a key aspect of that is creation. So if we live in alignment with our spiritual nature, we have that life-giving ability through what we create. Now, we create different things, you know, like I write. So if I've got giftedness, it's that I write different things. Yeah. Another person their calling may be architecture. So they're bringing to life beautiful buildings, right? That's their creative capacity, right? But and then once again, the shadow side of that, if people are living more egocentrically, they're either destroying, or what they're creating is not
destructive.
Good. Yeah, that's right. Nature. So it's that breaking apart. It's not that creative building up. It's tearing apart. So yeah, that's a big thing. Yeah, so someone like, you know, J.K. Rowling, you know, I've got a tremendous amount of respect for people that can hold the space for something better to come out of tragedy or adversity.
Yes.
To want to, or you often see this as well, you know, we've got these terrible situations of you've got parents who lose a child to, say, drunk driving or something like that, right? Now, there's two ways that can go. Obviously, I can't imagine how a parent in that situation, as a parent, I can't imagine how that must feel, in terms of you must just want to go to pieces and, you know, be depressed and sit in your house and all that sort of stuff, right? But then you got these parents who do something extraordinary, and they say, I don't want what happened to my child to happen to someone else. So I'm going to go out, I'm going to do education. I'm going to advocate for changes to the law. I'm going to do all these things so that the suffering I experienced doesn't have to be suffered by other parents. I want to make the world better in that situation. You know, it's like the alchemist sort of journey, right? It's turning that valueless metal to gold, right? So I think that's, in some respects, it's the hero's journey manifested in a multitude of different forms.
Yes.
And there's nothing more, getting back to this word, you look at the etymology of the word inspiration, in spirit.
Yes.
Right? So that inspiration comes from people embodying that spiritual force within themselves. There's all this alignment with what we're talking about. The language aligns.
Yes.
If we look at what the etymology of the words mean, how they work together, it's kind of all there. It's just for us to see it, you know. to be present. And I'm on that journey as well, you know.
Yes.
So it's a core part of what my work is as well.
It's interesting. I've found in my own research that spirit starts by knocking on the door very gently.
Yeah.
And we don't listen to it. And then it knocks a bit louder.
Yeah.
And we still don't listen to it.
I love that.
Louder and louder.
The Indian, that Native American saying, listen to the whispers so you don't have to hear the screams. You heard that?
Yes.
Yeah, same idea. Yeah, and that sort of testifies, Bryn, right? Listen to the whispers. So it's always there. It's a part. It's who we are. It's our intuition that we ignore, right? It's kind of something that speaks to us whether it's through meditation or mindfulness or being out in nature, where we create that space, and life speaks to us in very clear and powerful ways, you know. And it's when we listen to that, right, that we can save ourselves a hell of a lot of pain. Not that life will always be life, right?
Yeah.
And the things that happen, you know, they may cause us pain and we can grow through that, but they don't have to cause us unnecessary suffering. We contribute a lot to that ourselves because of this refusal to listen. Refusal to listen. So yeah, but you're exactly right. You know, paying attention to life and so yeah, we don't have to hear that, to experience that painful crash, which really is Icarus falling from the clouds.
Yes.
Splat.
And going back to what I was saying earlier on about looking about how life flows through us into the nodes, because I said we were looking at things very much from the nodes. I found that even in some of my darkest periods, that when it's got that bad, and then you acknowledge how bad things are, and then you feel the beauty of, wow, life's really been banging on the door, trying to come through.
Yeah.
And so back to my question earlier on, you know, spirit is always trying its best.
Absolutely. And I think as well,
it's always present.
The thing about you know, hardship, you know, whether it's a divorce, whether it's the loss of a loved. I mean, I lost my dad at 13, so I think that was a pivotal part of my life journey as well. And I think like the older you get, I think what adversity gives you the opportunity to do is it plays a disintegrating role to your ego identity. So whatever kind of, you know, here's another example, right? And you hear this a lot with athletes when they retire. Some of them, you know, Lauren Jackson experienced it. I think, you know, I remember Barry Hall saying something like that. They may retire, slip into a depression, and a big part of that is around identity. Who am I now, right?
Yes.
Or for example, you know, maybe, I don't want to speak too generally, but men typically associate very, very strongly with their work, right?
Yeah.
So they get to a certain age and they go into retirement, right? Then there's of course quite a strong correlation between, you know, what is it? You know, a number of men experience heart attacks or die or something post you know, retirement, you know, or the stress associated with that. But you know, a fall coming from that would be, who am I now that I'm not a lawyer, an architect, an accountant, or this sort? So it's that falling away of that identity, which can sink someone further into depression or something like that, or it can create a space for them to go deeper into themselves, to really connect with the unexpressed nature of spirit that's inside of them.
Like the COVID break.
Yeah, exactly right. But all these different events, you know, these different milestones in life or things that happen, they present us with this opportunity. You know, whether we sort of take that as an opportunity
or not,
or do we just see it as hardship, right? And that's the eternal question that we all sort of face. I mean, and if we're living from ego consciousness, right, we're going to resist that with all our might. You know, we're going to resist those events and not wanting to grow and maybe slip into like a more of a victim narrative and say, why me? Why is life doing this to me? And it's like, and then you sort of bring in the saying that life isn't, you know, life doesn't happen to us, it happens for us. Okay. Now I know that's some might see that as sort of like a problematic notion in terms of the different things that happen to you, thinking, well, you know, how the hell can you say that? Because this thing was so painful and these sorts, like, for example, my father dying, right? Although, in hindsight, you kind of see things differently. Where, now if I can look back at that, I can kind of see, well, I don't think I would ever be on the path that I'm on, be able to be the person I am, had I not suffered
Yes.
that experience. If I went through my life in kid gloves, nothing negative happened to me, what sort of person would I become? I'd probably be, very, very fragile in my sort of composition and the construction about who I am. So yeah, it's an interesting notion. I remember speaking to a woman who had cancer. She actually was cured of cancer with a lot of like natural therapies and things. And she's someone I interviewed, and she's the one who recited that quote. This thing didn't happen to me. And it was really, once I looked at it, this thing's happened for me. And there was like a lot of things that were happening in her life that she cleared from it to be able to jump into that new transition of, experiencing the cure from cancer and those sorts of things. So getting those toxic influences out of her life, which was an incredible kind of story to hear as well. So yeah, and I think this is like, once again, it's a universal human story. Everyone goes through things. It's kind of, it's how you respond to it. It's that, I guess it's quite trite because it's become so mainstream now, but it's not what happens to you, it's how you respond to what happens, right?
Yes.
That responsiveness, once again, not the reactiveness.
Yes.
It's the key thing. Yeah. Whereas that I'm a victim, that's that reactiveness. That's what you, as soon as something bad happens, that's what you feel. And that's understandable. When we're not saying that, I'm not saying that as a judgment. I'm just saying that as an observation. It's so easy, that reactive thing, to say that. But it takes a step back. Maybe it takes time. Maybe it takes perspective. Maybe it takes reflection to be able to respond to it and say, okay, there are things of that maybe I can see I contributed to, or that this is something that life has presented me with as a learning opportunity for not only myself, but something that I can connect with deeper within myself to bring to the world to improve its condition as well. Because once again, it always flows back into the world, right? This isn't just about whatever happens and reconciling that and making my life better. It's not about that. It's always about, okay, how's that going to flow back into the world? The parents who've lost a child to a drunk driver, going back into the world. How do we make sure this doesn't happen again?
Yeah. So spirit and life can continue.
Yeah. The perpetuation of that life-giving energy, right? Rather than the life-destroying energy of someone taking out another human being because of their own vice or addiction or unconsciousness, those sorts of things. So it's those individual things being manifested on a broader scale, and that's always happening, like you said, with the nodes in a space.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're transmitting.
Always transmitting. Always
got feet.
Yeah. But what are we transmitting?
Yes.
From where we are within ourselves.
I've recently started using the analogy with people that we've got. If we look at the physical commons, I'd like to think we've got to a place now where we don't throw cigarette butts and Snickers wrappers out the car because we don't want to clutter up and litter the physical commons.
Yeah.
Yet, if we look at the sort of unseen, the thinking, the feeling, the beliefs commons, we're chucking all sorts of rubbish around.
Absolutely.
And consciously, unconsciously, wittingly, unwittingly, at it all the time. And so I guess, starting to bring it all back around and sum up the conversation, one of the biggest things that sticks out to me amongst many things is that it really doesn't matter whether you are the CEO or the janitor. Granted, the CEO has hierarchical positional power to influence within an organisation, granted. And I'm not putting that to one side. I'm not denying that. But ultimately, everybody in that organisation, from CEO to janitor, is an active node in that space.
Totally.
And the closer we are to ourselves, being present, connected to the human spirit, the more we become proactive nodes in that space. than if we are unconnected and then we're just moving around.
Correct. And empowered in our ability to influence it for the common good.
Yes.
Because
We would be connected and more sensitive to it to be able to act and see the relationships upon which we can act.
Yeah, and this once again, this comes back to integrity and the definition I gave, right? It's like, okay, we live in there's the material aspect to existence, okay, but there's also the immaterial, the metaphysical, right, above the physical. And this is the spiritual stuff we're talking about, and it's being able to, like yin and yang, hold the two,
yes,
and be able to reconcile them. And unfortunately, even though I think things are changing, things are evolving through conversations such as this and how, we impact in the world. But, you look at things in terms of like culture, like a term which I don't like, say soft skills, right?
Yeah.
That's a very diminishing type of term to all of the manifestations of the human spirit, right? Things like, listening or team building or communication, all these sorts of things that are crucial, right? So, but that's understandable because those sort of terms come from people that are really focused on the rational material, and those things have got a place, right?
Yeah.
But what about the revelatory nature of spirit, the insights that come through intuition of being connected to our spirit? We've got to be able to reconcile. We've got to be able to reconcile both sides of that. That's integrity, right? That's healing, reconciliation, atonement, right? Now, I don't mean that in the religious sense, but if you look at atonement, once again, going back to etymology, at one-man, being able to hold that wholeness.
Yeah, atone for what you've done, allow all parts to return.
Yeah, that's it. Learning from the past, and playing a role in healing it rather than perpetuating dysfunction, which is exactly what you said in terms of the nodes contributing to the whole. Nothing's irredeemable.
No,
I think.
Really enjoyed this conversation.
So have I. And thanks so much for the opportunity to contribute to the podcast as well. I hope your viewers get a lot from it.
If anybody wants to reach out and find you, where can they find you?
Yeah, I've got a blog, Dr. L. Christian Duperouzel, on WordPress, where I talk about a whole bunch of different things around conscious business, those sorts of things. I've got some academic articles that are out, so if someone was to sort of Google my name, those things will come up. And I've got a book coming out around, I imagine, April or May 2023, that's tentatively titled Calling New Leaders, How Living Your Calling Will Make You an Inspired Leader of the Modern World. And this is where I really dig a lot deeper into some of the concepts we've covered today.
Superb. Christian, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Bree. I appreciate it.
There we go.